there, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the next in the series called A Closer Book. This is where I talk about 3 of my recent reads. Today we're talking about books number 57, 58, and 59. Book number 57 is Liane Moriarty's 9 Perfect Strangers. I've read every book that Liane Moriarty has ever published and I have enjoyed her writing, which is why I keep coming back for more. I've enjoyed some of her books more than others. This is definitely not as strong as some of her earlier writings, but I really admired a lot of things about this book. The title, however, is a little bit misleading because 9 Perfect Strangers suggests 9 people who've never met before having an encounter. But 9 Perfect Strangers is set in the Tranquillium Retreat in Australia, where 9 guests have checked in for a 10-day stay to have their lives changed. And there aren't 9 people, there are 9 guests plus 3 or 4 employees who we get to know as well. And none of them are perfect. They all have issues, and they're not all strangers because some of them have pre-existing relationships before they come to the retreat. And I suppose the title being chosen that way is suggestive. It's supposed to mean something. And even in the book, the author does show that things aren't always the way they seem. On the guest list, we have a young couple dealing with relationship issues. We have a mother, father, and their teenage daughter as they're processing and dealing with a loss and trying to find a new way to live with each other after they've lost someone close to them. And a novelist who, even though she doesn't seem like she's the main character, she's definitely not the first person that we meet, because she is the writer from the group and this is a book that's being written by a writer. We do get a little bit of a biased perspective from her in that we're following her, and she's the one who, at the end of the story, she breaks character and starts speaking directly to the reader. But throughout the course of the novel, we get multiple perspectives. So we get internal musings as well as seeing the situation at the spa play out from each person's viewpoint. And that is typical of Liane Moriarty's writing style. It is something that I really enjoy. I think she does it really well, where she gets the reader to be invested in all the characters that are presented so that you're never really sure who you're rooting for. If there is a conflict, who you want to emerge as victor. And I think she did it really well in this book. Again, not as well as she has done it in previous books, but I think it's a little unfair to compare an author's current work to everything that she has written before. Big Little Lies was one of her previous novels. It's been adapted for a miniseries, I think, on HBO. It is one of my favorite books by her, and even though she uses the same kind of writing technique, I don't feel like it's fair to compare this book to that. This one has its own quality. She does, in this one, discuss things that are a little controversial. A lot of the situations that Liane Moriarty presented are a little bit inane, and we do have one character's spiral from control freak to out of control psychotic, and that felt a little contrived and insane. However, I think Liane Moriarty cleverly presented unlikable characters and unlikely situations to reflect some of the overindulgence of our society and maybe even write a parody of our tendency to see things as more important and significant than they really are. And if you haven't read the book, you might not completely understand what I'm referring to, but I don't want to give too much about this plot away because I recommend that you read it. I know it feels like I've been recommending a lot of books. That's because I've read a lot of books that I really enjoy, and this is another one of them. I gave this a strong 4-star rating. I know it's had some mixed reviews, I think again because people are comparing it to other things and they're expecting maybe a thriller, and there is a little bit of a situation that is here that seems thrilling. But again, I think the author used that mock suspense to play with us and to get us to acknowledge things about fake reality and fake news. So if that isn't enough to convince you, let's just say that I really like this book, and if you read it, I'd love to talk with you about it. And if you haven't read anything by this author before, I suggest that you try her. The Husband's Secret or Big Little Lies is where I'd suggest that you start if you really want to fall in love with this author like I have. And then book number 58 is Ramona, Quimby, Age 8 by Beverly Cleary. I read this one because I was doing a book challenge where I had to read a book that had been honored or awarded the Newbery Medal. And this is a Newbery Honor book. It didn't win the award, but it received that accolade. And I think that this was really well deserved because Beverly Cleary shines a light on some of the issues that children face. And the book is appropriate for children who are maybe dealing with things and can see a fictional character go through some of those situations and maybe get a perspective on how to handle them, or get some counsel, some advice from a peer on how to handle difficult issues or difficult situations in their life. And in this one, Ramona Quimby is about to start 3rd grade, and her family has given her a unique job because her father is going back to school and money is tight. She needs to be watched by a neighbor, and the neighbor is also watching another kid who's a little younger than Ramona, and she has to learn to control her impulses, and she has to learn to play nice with someone that she doesn't necessarily enjoy spending time with, but it's a sacrifice that she has to make on behalf of her family's improved conditions. Ramona, at the age of 8, is being asked to contribute to her family's well-being in this way. And I thought that that was a really important lesson for children to learn. And to see how Ramona takes this job seriously. Every time she's tempted to be cross to this little girl that she's forced to spend her afternoons with, every time she reminds herself this is what she's doing for her family. And oh my, I just thought that that was so well represented, that children at the age of 8 could be responsible for something. And I thought that that was a fantastic way of presenting this idea that a child at age 8 could learn that she could contribute, that she could learn to be mature about her impulses, that she doesn't have to yield to the temptation to be mean to someone, but that even when she can't control her circumstances, she can't control her surroundings, and she doesn't have a say in the people that she spends time with, she can still learn to behave herself and to be mature. And if nothing else, I thought that that was a really good lesson to come from this book. But there were other things here as well. In the story, we also get a situation where Ramona thinks that her teacher doesn't like her. She's overheard her teacher say things, and she thinks that, you know, she starts to contemplate what she might have done to contribute to her teacher not loving her like everyone else seems to. I mean, Ramona is the main character here. She's used to being the center of attention, but the attention that she's getting from her teacher isn't good, and she has to take stock of herself and reflect on some of the things that she's done, maybe to make her teacher not have a good attitude towards her. And the way Ramona, again at age 8, learns to discuss a difficult situation with an adult, learns to start conversations about her feelings and express her thoughts in a very controlled way. Like, she doesn't have outbursts, she doesn't behave in a violent way, she doesn't throw a tantrum, she isn't having a bad attitude towards her teacher. She just doesn't understand what's going on, and she asks for an explanation. And I thought that that again was an incredible lesson to teach to children, that, you know, things aren't always going to be the way you want. You might feel like you're being treated unfairly. You might feel like someone has gotten the wrong impression of you and you'd like for them to change their minds about you. But here's the way to deal with that. Have a conversation with the person, maybe address what happened that caused that situation in the first place, and explain yourself, explain why you behaved in a certain way and maybe why the person's impression is incorrect, and give them an opportunity to see you in a better light. I think that the morals from this story were fantastic, were presented in a really interesting way. Again, this book is written for young readers. I would say that the audience is supposed to be age 8 to 12. It actually says it in the book. But this is a book that's appropriate for even older kids if they would want to read this book, because the lessons here, I think, are lessons that if you haven't learned them before, it's important that you learn them at some point as you move forward. So I read this one because of a challenge. This is not a book that I'd probably choose for myself these days, and I didn't feel like I was as immersed in the story as I probably would have been reading this book as a child. But I thought that the lessons and the morals that came out of this story were so important and so well presented that I'd recommend this to audiences of all ages, just because I think Beverly Cleary, she does a really good job of bringing across a really good message through a character who you can't help but love, can't help but root for. Ramona Quimby, age 8, Beverly Cleary. High rating. I don't remember if I gave this a star rating, but I recommend it, of course. Book number 59 of my 2019 reading is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, also known as The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I think this book was first published in the UK with the title of 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, but it was changed for the American market because there was another book that was titled The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And in order maybe not to confuse people in thinking that the two books were related, they changed the book for the American market. And I think that The 7.5 Deaths works much better than The 7 Deaths because there are 7.5 deaths in here. And how does a person die half of a time, you might ask? Well, you're going to need to read the book. But I'll give you a brief synopsis. This book takes the kind of Groundhog Day theme and marries it with a murder mystery and a family saga and a lot of other elements that are just so good. There's a man who wakes up one morning and he can't remember who he is. He wakes up with a name, a woman's name in his mind, in his mouth, and he doesn't know who the woman is or what her relationship is to him. But then he starts hearing people around him. He's outdoors, and there's a woman who's being chased by a pursuer with a gun, and then she screams, there's a gunshot, and she's silenced. So he's convinced that she has been killed, but she's not Evelyn Hardcastle. She might not even be the Anna that he wakes up thinking about. The revelation of Anna comes way late in this book, and this is over 400 pages, so you have to be patient with this novel as it reveals itself. It is the story of this man who wakes up. He's trapped in a time loop, except he has a different identity every day, and he has the same puzzle that he needs to solve, and he's been going through these loops, several iterations, trying to find out who murdered Evelyn Hardcastle, and he needs to prove who has murdered her before he runs out of hosts, before he runs out of time, and he has to start the loop all over again, devoid of all the memories, of all the clues that he's collected during this time. And so it is a puzzle, and I really enjoy puzzles, so I enjoyed a lot of things about this book. I enjoy the gradual reveal of clues and how the different hosts, the different identities that this character is able to assume, how their gifts and their talents and their jobs and their skills allow him to get a little bit more of the puzzle as he approaches his 7 or 8 day timeline. There are a few mysteries that even at the end I felt like weren't quite solved, because just when you think you've solved the mystery of the murder, another mystery presents itself, and you move from solving one murder to many murders, and you move from following one victim to several victims, and the identity of those victims is a little conflicted and convoluted, but it really enhanced the enjoyment. And it is this revelation, this moving back and forth between victims and suspects and assistants and aides, that makes the story so delightful, because there's a lot about the book that is different. There's a lot about the timelines that isn't quite nailed down. We know that this is happening in some past time because they're still using carriages as transportation. However, they do have a car, and so the story seems to be happening on the brink of some changing time, and we see that teetering change in identity reflected in lots of other ways in the book. I gave this book a strong 4 to 4.5 stars. I rate books based on enjoyment, and for my enjoyment alone, I would say that this was a 5-star read, just because I liked how much of a page turner it was. I really enjoyed the uniqueness of this story, the inventiveness, the cleverness that the author displayed in taking these different stories and putting them together to form this epic thriller. And the fact that it's a debut novel also speaks to the breadth that I think this author is going to be able to achieve in his future books. But I had to take a little bit of the accolades away just because here's the thing with a time loop story. Because the author needs to connect things from one day to the next, he presents things a little bit out of sequence, because after the first 1 or 2 days, the hosts all know each other. Aiden knows the host that he's going to be inhabiting, so he makes connections with these people that he's going to become in the future. And he brings things from the future into his present, and ultimately impacts the story in a way that the reader becomes a little bit frustrated, because we're being presented with things that we know we don't have an explanation for yet, and we just have to trust that the author is going to reveal them in a satisfactory way. And that continues from very early in the book up until the end. And there are times when it feels necessary and times when it feels a little bit more like a convenience. And so that was maybe my only minor irritation in how the author has to reach back and forth to change things to make the story work, so that the person who's solving the riddle, that he has all the tools, that he takes full advantage of his time, that he takes full advantage of his contacts, but it also feels like he's manipulating the puzzle. But other than that, I love this book. I highly recommend it. If you like thrillers, if you like Groundhog Day retellings, which I absolutely do, and this is my third one I think that I've read this year. If you haven't read The 7.5 Deaths, or if you're in the UK or someplace else where it's being published as The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, same book, but I highly recommend that you pick it up. So that's a closer look at these 3 recent reads. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's talk in the comments. If you've read this book, send me a message, like a private message on Instagram or someplace. Send me an email. There is a question that I have about a resolution in this book that I feel like the author left a little bit undone, but I can't talk about it because it's a spoiler. But if you've read it, I'd love to talk with you. So thanks for watching this video. Thanks for being here. Let's talk in the comments. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.